I've obviously just completed this book, The Rise of Nuclear Iran, and I've been on a book tour. I'm only at the very beginning, about a week and a half into this. Yet I have been struck, having visited New York, Washington, Los Angeles, speaking to different groups, that people do not understand the gravity of the hour. There's a kind of complacency that seems to have set in many corners of the decision-making community, of the policy-making community, of governmental sectors. Obviously, the United States is absorbed in its internal affairs. But just to give you a sense, one of the things you do when you write a book on Iran is you're forced to read material like the regular reports of the International Atomic Energy Agency. A new report just came out the end of August, beginning of September, detailing what is going on with the enrichment of uranium at the Natanz enrichment facility in Iran. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency has serious problems. We know what Mohammad Baradeh has been doing. He's been presenting as pretty a face on Iran as possible. But the reports contain certain data which the entire international community, in theory, can agree upon. And the most recent report indicates that Iran has approximately 1,500 kilograms of low-enriched uranium in its possession. According to most people who specialize in this field, all you need are 700 kilograms of low-enriched uranium to put through further enrichment to create military-grade uranium and obtain and produce a sufficient fuel for one nuclear bomb. 700 is all you need, and we're already at 1,500. So the numbers should be alarming. The numbers should be a cause of concern and not a cause of complacency. But that, unfortunately, is what we're witnessing. I'm going to identify for you this evening what I think are some of the reasons why this complacency has set in. It begins with the switch of administrations, from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. President Obama, during the campaign and at present, has been dedicated to the idea of U.S. diplomatic engagement with Iran. And the policymaking community in Washington has been saying, let's not start engagement until after the presidential elections that just took place on June 12th in Iran. So as a result, putting Iran front and center and coming up with a new effective policy has been delayed. Now, when you read my book in one of the earlier chapters, you'll find out that engagement is not a new idea. It was tried by past administrations and didn't work very well. But most importantly, it was tried by the European Union. Back in 2003, after the first revelations of the clandestine nuclear program came out in Washington through the Iranian opposition, the European Union was charged by the United States to sit with Iranian diplomats and try and see whether they could reach a suspension of the uranium enrichment program. It was tried in 2003, 2004, 2005. 2 agreements were reached on temporary suspension. They were completely violated by the Iranians. The whole effort was over by 2005. In 2006, the head Iranian nuclear negotiator, Hassan Rouhani, a man with tremendous experience, he was National Security Advisor to Iran for 16 years. He was speaking to a small group of Iranians in Tehran in a lecture that was later transcribed and leaked to the West. In Rouhani's description, what he succeeded in doing, and regardless of his motivation for telling this story, it's objectively true. He said, while we were negotiating with the Europeans, our engineers were working in double shifts to complete the Isfahan uranium conversion plant. Just without going into the whole chemistry of uranium and nuclear weapons, uranium is enriched in 3 phases. It's mined, turned into yellowcake. It's turned into, afterwards, a second stage of conversion. UF6 gas is produced, that's uranium hexafluoride. And later, it's finally enriched in the centrifuges, either for a civilian reactor or nuclear weapons. So second stage was done while the Europeans talked to the Iranians. Now, the Iranians gained 2 things while they were talking to the Europeans. Obviously, they completed the second phase of uranium enrichment. But they also managed to put off any measures by the international community against them for violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Remember, the whole Iranian effort to enrich uranium was discovered in 2002. The first action in the UN Security Council is 2006. They bought 4 years by talking to the West. So I understand it's always desirable to try and talk to your adversaries, to try and persuade them to change course. But if it's already been tried and failed, why waste precious time from January to now the month of September, which has now been lost? And I think it's part of the complacency that we're witnessing. Let me go to a second point, and that's how people estimate the threat of a nuclear Iran. You know, you hear this more in the buzz behind the scenes. People won't say this overtly, but it's a prevalent thought. In Washington today, where slowly but surely, people in the inner circles of power are accepting the idea that Iran will cross the nuclear threshold. And one of the explanations one hears from time to time is that, you know what? Pakistan crossed the nuclear threshold. Did the sky fall in? No. North Korea crossed the nuclear threshold. Was it the end of the world? No. So another state, Iran, will cross the nuclear threshold, will get inspected, we'll live with it. But what is completely misunderstood is that Iran is not North Korea, and Iran is not Pakistan. Certainly if Pakistani weapons fall in the hands of Al-Qaeda with the dissolution of Pakistan, that's a very serious development. But Pakistan is preoccupied with the threat of India from its perspective, and it isn't exporting the Pakistani Islamic Revolution. North Korea, regime survival. North Korea is a serious problem, but North Korea isn't out to conquer Japan. Iran is a whole different story. As we heard from Mort Zuckerman, there are people in the Persian Gulf today, Arab leaders, who perceive that Iran is ready to pluck Iraq as a ripe fruit, which will come under its orbit. Iran today not only has its fingers in Iraq, it has its hands in Iraq, supplying various parts of the insurgency, particularly the Shiite militias. It has its hands in Afghanistan, supporting the Taliban. The Egyptian intelligence caught 49 Hezbollah operatives in Egypt proper. Some of that's been attributed to helping the Hamas in Gaza, but some of that is directed against the internal stability of the Egyptian state. The Iranians have announced claims to countries in the Gulf. So those who like to go on American television and say, well, Iran has no ambitions of conquest. Well, this year in Kayhan newspaper, the mouthpiece of the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, the Ayatollah and Supreme Leader of Iran, Kayhan newspaper announced that Bahrain was a province of Iran. Now, those of us who served in the UN seem to remember Bahrain is an independent state and a member state of the United Nations. It's also the command center of the US Fifth Fleet. But nonetheless, Iran has put forward a claim. Now, beyond all this, anyone who reads the reports of the US State Department on Iran knows that Iran is the largest exporter of international terrorism in the world. So you have a state that seeks hegemony in the Middle East, that has been the biggest supporter of international terrorism in the world, and I haven't even spoken about Hamas and Hezbollah with Israel. The biggest supporter of international terrorism, and it is about to cross the nuclear finishing line. You would expect people to be more animated about this subject, but they're not. There's complacency, there's quiet. Finally, I'll just share with you another observation, which is, I think, a very mistaken notion that exists, with the idea that goes as follows. The United States held off the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Now compare a future Iranian arsenal to the Soviet arsenal that existed all those years. It's small. So why can't the United States use deterrence to hold Iran at bay? Already Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has spoken about extending a nuclear umbrella, or at least let me correct myself, a defensive umbrella to the Arab states who are concerned with the growth of Iranian power. President Mubarak rejected this notion. But the Iranian press wrote that the offer of Secretary Clinton, who was well-meaning, implies American acquiescence to Iran as a nuclear power. In other words, the idea of deterrence is filtering in. I don't think the issue of Iran fits into the model of the Soviet-American relationship. And as I've written before and stated, I don't remember that there were Soviet suicide bombers. That's a unique phenomenon we saw with Hezbollah in Iran that developed way back in the early 1980s and was later imitated by the Sunni terrorist organizations. But I think most importantly, to understand the real problem of Iran, and with this I'll close, back in 9/11, the United States was attacked by Al-Qaeda. And since then, some European states have been attacked by Al-Qaeda. England, Spain, for example, and others are alerted to threats. But when the United States was attacked by Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda was based in a sanctuary that existed in Afghanistan under the Taliban. And as you all recall, in 2001, the Taliban did not have nuclear weapons. The Taliban did not have long-range missile delivery systems, which Iran now has. And therefore, the United States and its NATO allies could go into Afghanistan in 2001, take down the Taliban regime in Kabul. It's true the Taliban ran for Pakistan and have since been a problem. But the United States could send an effective deterrent message to every state in the world supporting international terrorism. If you attack the American mainland, your regime is put at threat. Your regime will be removed. And with that deterrent message, maybe you don't have to use military force afterwards if that deterrent message is understood. But now let's fast forward from 2001 to 2011 and 2012. Iran, the largest supporter of international terrorism in the world, backs Hezbollah, which is now penetrating everywhere beyond the Middle East, including Latin America. Iran also hosts Sunni terrorist groups. Al-Qaeda went into Iran. It split after America went into Afghanistan. Part went to Pakistan, part went to Iran. So if we're in 2011 and 2012 and there is a major attack against the United States or its allies, and the U.S. feels it has to go into the host country that gave sanctuary to this terrorist threat, Iran, can you go into a nuclear Iran the way you went into Afghanistan in 2001? No, it's clear it's a much different story, a much different problem of a different scale. And as a result, the balance of power between those who are supporting terrorism and those who are fighting terrorism will shift. This is not like the Soviet-American balance, it's something else. But it is as serious, considering the kinds of weapons developments that are going on in Iran and the kinds of weapons that the terrorist organizations themselves wish to develop. All of this is preventable. The United States is a very strong country. You know what? Israel is a very strong country. And right now, our biggest weakness is our own complacency. Our own failure to grasp, as I said at the beginning, the gravity of the moment. So if there's a reason why I wrote this book, it wasn't to come from Israel to New York City to tell the United States what it should do. That is not my role. I'm an Israeli citizen and a former Israeli diplomat. But it is my role to take every bit of knowledge that I can gather about this problem and explain its severity to audiences here. Hopefully we're planning to go on to London on October 12th and explain it in other capitals around the world. And a book is just a vehicle, but it's an important one because I believe people are persuaded by facts and not just by empty slogans. So if I have to just summarize, is that this is a very serious problem. For Israel, it's an existential problem. It threatens our very future. And it's my hope that our allies will respond to the gravity of this challenge the same way Israel is beginning to respond itself. Thank you.